They say it is better to be feared than loved. But what if fear makes you hollow? What if love makes you weak? Power asks for blood. But who dares keep their soul intact while rising to the top? In the shadows of history, one name echoes louder than the rest when power is dissected with cold precision: Machiavelli. He didn't invent manipulation. He simply exposed it. This video is not a tutorial on cruelty. It's a psychological map for those who walk the razor's edge between power and self-betrayal. In a world that rewards dominance but punishes vulnerability, how do you rise? Without losing yourself? It is much safer to be feared than loved, if one must choose. Niccolo Machiavelli, the Prince. In a world obsessed with charisma, charm, and likability, we've been conditioned to fear being feared. Leadership today is packaged in smiles, motivational quotes, and carefully curated vulnerability. We celebrate kindness over cunning, empathy over effectiveness. But beneath the surface, there's a different truth, one ancient, dangerous, and brutally honest. To lead, truly lead, you must be willing to enter the shadow. This is not a call to tyranny. This is not about cruelty. This is about something far more powerful, and far more unsettling. This is about what happens when a man refuses to be liked, but instead chooses to be respected. When he chooses strength over approval, principle over popularity, fear over fragile affection. This is the path of dark leadership. And Machiavelli was its prophet. But in this age, where the ego inflates like a balloon and collapses at the first rejection, how do you command power, without losing your soul? Can you master the art of being feared, without becoming the monster they accuse you of being? Let us begin. The archetype of the feared leader. To lead through fear is not to instill terror, but to command respect. It is not the brute dictator who masters this art, but the one who stands at the edge of darkness with poise, control, and purpose. Machiavelli understood that human nature bends more quickly to fear than to love because fear protects one's power, while love makes it vulnerable. This is not cynicism, it is clarity. Let's turn inward and examine what fear-based leadership looks like in practice, not as cruelty, but as precision. It is the leader who doesn't explain every move, because mystery is power. It is the executive who doesn't apologize for necessary decisions, because guilt is a liability. It is the parent who sets immovable boundaries, because permissiveness kills trust. But more than that, the feared leader embodies a strange paradox. They are both distant and intimate. They keep others at a psychological distance, yet their presence leaves a lasting emotional imprint. They do not need to be liked to be followed. Their power does not rely on popularity, but on necessity. And here is where the temptation lies, to cross the line, to become intoxicated with fear itself. But if you fall into that abyss, you lose your soul. So how do we hold the line? Fear without tyranny. There is a point at which fear becomes tyranny. It is the moment when respect transforms into resentment, when silence no longer means reverence, but retreat. True dark leadership is not tyranny. It is control that is measured. It is authority that is earned through mastery of self, not indulgence in domination. To be feared without losing yourself is to build a fortress, but not a prison. You must control perception, not people. You must command without crushing. And this is where modern psychology steps in. Studies show that individuals in positions of power who practice emotional restraint are more respected than those who seek connection at every turn. Over-attachment, emotional oversharing, and indecisiveness are not signs of evolved leadership, they are signs of internal collapse. Machiavelli would nod. For in his world, the prince who reveals too much, loves too much, or bends too easily is devoured. And in today's world, where social media encourages oversharing, and leadership is often confused with emotional availability, we are watching a crisis of command unfold. Fear in the age of visibility. In the past, power was veiled. The ruler sat in a chamber of marble and silence. The general stood above the battlefield. The boss remained behind the office door. Now, power is public. It tweets. It live streams. It answers emails at midnight and apologizes for everything. We are watching the mythology of leadership dissolve, and with it, the potency of fear. But Machiavelli reminds us, power must remain mysterious. You must never allow yourself to be too visible, too accessible, too understood. Because when the people see every weakness, every crack, every soft emotion, you are no longer feared. You are no longer untouchable. You are merely one of them. And that is the death of dark leadership. The modern leader must adapt, use visibility strategically, not constantly. Speak rarely but powerfully. Be online but emotionally distant. Appear human, but never ordinary. Because leadership in the 21st century is not about control of land or armies, it's about controlling perception. Psychological warfare, the unseen weapon. The art of fear is psychological. You do not need to raise your voice to be heard. You do not need to threaten to create pressure. You need only presence. In psychology, there's a concept called affective dominance, the ability to enter a room and silently alter its emotional climate. Great leaders possess it. So do predators. Machiavelli would argue, make yourself emotionally larger than the space you occupy. Not louder, larger. Speak slowly. Speak less. Make others wait. Withhold approval. These are weapons sharper than swords. The modern battlefield is not in physical terrain, but in psychological space. Meetings, negotiations, interviews, conversations. And in these spaces, fear is the fastest way to power, if it is controlled. But that's the danger, isn't it? Most people do not know how to control fear. They project too much, and become tyrants. Or they suppress it, and become cowards. The Machiavellian leader does neither. They channel it, into charisma, clarity, and cold resolve. The anatomy of intimidation. What makes someone intimidating? It's not brute strength. It's not a raised voice or aggressive posturing. True intimidation lies in the unseen. In the silence. In the way someone doesn't flinch, doesn't chase, doesn't need. In the way they can hold eye contact without fear, or withhold it without explanation. Machiavelli would have called it a form of political elegance, a quiet form of dominance rooted in psychological discipline. A person who is feared knows how to slow the tempo of a conversation, how to leave others uncertain, how to create just enough ambiguity that the other must lean forward to understand. The fear doesn't come from what is said, but from what is left unsaid. Powerful individuals are often described as enigmatic. But that is not a passive trait. It is crafted, designed, controlled. To be feared without being hated, one must radiate a calm danger. Like a lion lying still. Authority versus authenticity. Here lies the paradox. If fear gives you power, what happens to your authenticity? Is it still you who commands the room, or is it the mask? Machiavelli knew this question would haunt leaders forever. His answer? Don't confuse your nature with your strategy. Authenticity is personal. Power is political. If you want to lead, you cannot always afford to be seen. You must wear the mask of gravitas, even when you feel uncertain. You must project confidence, even when you are in doubt. You must protect your essence by crafting your surface. This isn't deception. This is discipline. Self-cultivation. Psychological armor. Because when the world sees your vulnerability before you are ready, before it's metabolized into strength, they will exploit it. Not out of cruelty, but out of instinct. Fear preserves your space. It gives you room to be yourself in a world that will try to shape you into something else. Strategic cruelty. Machiavelli's most misunderstood lesson is simple. Cruelty, if well used, can be virtuous. This doesn't mean malice. It means clarity. A leader must know when to act with mercy, and when mercy will be mistaken for weakness. When to be soft like velvet, and when to be sharp like a blade. In The Prince, he wrote, "It is much safer to be feared than loved, when one must choose." But here's what people forget, he never said only feared. He said safer. More reliable. More predictable. Love is a storm. Fear is a wall. The art lies in knowing how to construct that wall without becoming imprisoned within it. Cruelty, when surgical, becomes a tool. When random, it becomes cancerous. A true dark leader, one who knows the Machiavellian path, is not addicted to punishment. He is allergic to chaos. And cruelty, for him, is order applied in extreme conditions. The art of emotional distance. To be feared without losing yourself, you must master the art of emotional distance. Not detachment. Not apathy. But strategic disconnection, the ability to feel without being ruled by feelings. The power to see clearly through the fog of desire, guilt, and affection. This is not easy. It means disappointing people. Saying no without apology. Letting people think you are colder than you really are. Because to lead, you cannot afford to be emotionally entangled with every opinion. You cannot serve the crowd and yourself at the same time. You must choose their comfort or your clarity. And if you choose clarity, if you choose to stand alone, some will fear you. And that fear will protect what is essential. Not because you are a monster, but because you refuse to become a slave to anyone else's story. The ego trap. Power, once tasted, becomes intoxicating. The applause. The obedience. The illusion of control. But here lies the trap. When your identity becomes tied to being feared, you lose the very self you were trying to protect. Many fall into this. They start with noble intentions. Discipline. Order. Strength. But over time, the fear of others becomes a mirror, and they begin to believe they are invincible. Untouchable. Above consequence. They confuse respect with submission. They forget that the goal was never domination, but preservation of inner truth. Machiavelli warned of this subtly. He advised rulers to be feared as long as it does not lead to hatred. Because hatred is chaos disguised as loyalty. And no kingdom survives it. Losing yourself in the armor. The armor we build to survive, confidence, strategy, calculated detachment, can become a prison. We wear it for so long that we forget the shape of the soul beneath it. To lead in a dark world, you must be strong. But strength without self-awareness becomes tyranny. Machiavellian leadership requires a paradox, to be ruthless in decision, but tender in conscience. To pierce through illusions, but never sever the connection to what makes you human. You must master the art of fear without becoming what you fear. You must learn to speak the language of power, without letting it rewrite the language of your soul. This is not easy. This is why most who rise fall. Because they win the throne, but lose the man who fought for it. The mirror of fear. Fear is a strange reflection. When you wield it, it doesn't just shape others, it begins to shape you. The more you rely on it to command, the more you distrust those around you. You begin to see threats where there are none. Loyalty looks like deception. Silence feels like rebellion. This is the psychological tax of Machiavellianism. You gain control of others, but begin losing control over your own inner peace. In a world governed by fear, the paranoid man survives, but he does not thrive. He watches the room, but never trusts it. He wins the war, but never knows peace. Power becomes both weapon and wound. And what's worse, he begins to fear losing the fear. For if people no longer tremble, will they still obey? That is the inner hell of the manipulative leader. He must constantly maintain the image of dominance. And yet that image slowly devours the human behind it. The empathy paradox. Empathy, the very thing that connects us, is seen as weakness in a Machiavellian frame. But true leadership demands selective empathy, the ability to understand without being controlled. To listen without being deceived. To feel without being manipulated. This is not about softness. It's about precision. The dark leader must learn. Empathy is not surrender, it is strategy. To know your enemy's desire is to know how to break their will. But to understand your own longing, that is how you save yourself. To lead without losing yourself, you must remember. You are not just a mask of strength. You are a soul with memory. A mind with limits. A heart with shadows. And your power must never silence that. For if you lose the ability to feel, you become the tyrant you once despised. The velvet trap of applause. There's another poison in the cup of power, admiration. Not love, admiration. That artificial applause that fills the room when fear has done its job. It is not real. It is not earned. It is the echo of submission, not the music of respect. But the ego drinks it anyway. And soon it becomes addicted to it, to being watched, praised, followed. Not because the leader is loved, but because those beneath him are afraid to look away. Machiavelli warned us, it is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. But he also knew that fear without virtue breeds chaos. The tyrant eventually falls. The feared man without honor is assassinated in silence. The applause he mistook for loyalty becomes the sound of knives being sharpened. When power becomes a cage. Eventually, even the most brilliant manipulator begins to sense it. That he is not free. He cannot reveal weakness. He cannot cry. He cannot doubt. He cannot trust. His kingdom is made of mirrors, and all of them lie to him. This is the final irony of dark leadership. You rise to power by dominating others, only to become a prisoner of the persona you've built. You forget how to be human. And worse, you forget that others are human too. Everything becomes a strategy. Every smile is a signal. Every word a weapon. Every silence a threat. But where does the strategy end? Where does the self begin? The paradox of the strong leader. Here's the paradox Machiavelli forces us to confront. To lead through fear, you must project strength. But to truly lead, to sustain power without losing your soul, you must also possess inner strength, the ability to withstand solitude, to resist the narcotic of praise, and to maintain clarity while walking the edge between tyranny and justice. Because not all fear is equal. There is fear that cripples. And there is fear that commands respect. The first is born of cruelty. The second is born of presence. One rules through trauma. The other through inevitability. One destroys the soul of the leader. The other reveals it. The question, then, is not whether to be feared, but what kind of fear do you inspire? Are you feared like a wildfire, reckless, consuming, and unpredictable? Or are you feared like a storm, powerful, disciplined, and undeniable? Power with a spine. There is a dark leadership that does not rot the self. It is Machiavellian in strategy, but stoic in soul. It is the art of imposing boundaries, not pain. It is the craft of commanding without cruelty, of intimidating without infantilizing. The true dark leader does not manipulate emotions for sport, he understands emotions as fuel for direction. He knows when to remain silent. He knows when to strike. And above all, he knows when not to. Because he is not ruled by his hunger for control. He uses because he is not ruled by his hunger for control. He uses control as a sculptor uses a chisel, not to destroy, but to carve structure from chaos. Fear without hatred, the razor's edge. One of Machiavelli's most misunderstood insights is this. It is much safer to be feared than loved, if one must choose. But he adds a critical clause that most ignore. Provided he is not hated. This nuance changes everything. To be feared without being hated is an art form, a psychological balancing act that separates tyrants from rulers, abusers from strategists, narcissists from visionaries. You do not achieve this through brute force alone. You achieve it through precision. By demonstrating consequences, not vengeance. By showing strength without sadism. By making decisions that seem inevitable, not impulsive. By projecting stability even when chaos surrounds you. The most feared leaders in history were not the loudest, they were the most inevitable. Why the world respects shadowed power. The modern world, obsessed with positivity and appeasement, finds dark leadership uncomfortable. But here's the truth. In times of crisis, people do not follow the kind, they follow the capable. They crave order. They seek certainty. They yearn for someone who can carry the burden of the unknown. And when that burden is carried with conviction, without cruelty, but without apology, the fear it inspires becomes a kind of reverence. This is not leadership as performance. It is leadership as gravity. Because he is not ruled by his hunger for control. He uses control as a sculptor uses a chisel, not to destroy, but to carve structure from chaos. Fear without hatred, the razor's edge. One of Machiavelli's most misunderstood insights is this. It is much safer to be feared than loved, if one must choose. But he adds a critical clause that most ignore. Provided he is not hated. This nuance changes everything. To be feared without being hated is an art form, a psychological balancing act that separates tyrants from rulers, abusers from strategists, narcissists from visionaries. You do not achieve this through brute force alone. You achieve it through precision. By demonstrating consequences, not vengeance. By showing strength without sadism. By making decisions that seem inevitable, not impulsive. By projecting stability even when chaos surrounds you. The most feared leaders in history were not the loudest, they were the most inevitable. Why the world respects shadowed power. The modern world, obsessed with positivity and appeasement, finds dark leadership uncomfortable. But here's the truth. In times of crisis, people do not follow the kind, they follow the capable. They crave order. They seek certainty. They yearn for someone who can carry the burden of the unknown. And when that burden is carried with conviction, without cruelty, but without apology, the fear it inspires becomes a kind of reverence. This is not leadership as performance. It is leadership as gravity. The duality of power, balancing fear and conscience. To be feared without being hated. To be powerful without being corrupted. To command without compromising the self. This is the paradox at the heart of dark leadership. And it is where many fall. History is a graveyard of leaders who misunderstood the balance between ruthlessness and restraint. Caligula, Stalin, Idi Amin, names that echo with power abused, with fear turned cancerous. They were feared, yes, but at the cost of humanity, honor, and ultimately, stability. Machiavelli warns of this delicate equilibrium. In The Prince, he writes, "A prince must be cunning like a fox and fierce like a lion. One without the other will lead to ruin." Let us pause and decode this metaphor. The lion is raw power, dominance, strength, fear. The fox is strategic cunning, deception, patience, subtlety. To rely solely on one is to become blind. A lion sees only brute resistance. A fox sees only trickery. But a true leader must wield both, a sovereign of shadow and light. Power without principle is a weapon turned inward. The danger of Machiavellianism is not in the manipulation, it is in the loss of self during its practice. You can climb to power using fear. But if you forget your values, your roots, your reasons, you will become a hollow crown. A tyrant dressed in robes of paranoia. Modern psychology confirms this. Power, when unchecked, alters the brain. It blunts empathy, reduces self-awareness, and increases impulsivity. Powerful people, studies show, are more likely to interrupt, to dehumanize, to cheat, and to rationalize immoral decisions. The mind of a leader can become intoxicated by control. This is why integrity is not a luxury, it is a survival mechanism. In a world of manipulation, it is your inner compass that must remain untouchable. You must be capable of darkness, but never consumed by it. The fearful respect you. The hateful wait to destroy you. Machiavelli notes that while it is safer to be feared than loved, a leader must never become hated. Fear can be stable. Hatred breeds revenge. A prince must avoid being despised and hated, Machiavelli writes. For both will conspire against him. This nuance is vital. The difference between fear and hate is in how you use power. Fear disciplines people. Hate dehumanizes them. To be feared well is to be respected deeply, perhaps even admired from a distance. It is to be predictable in justice, firm in consequence, and unshakable in principle. But to rule by humiliation, chaos, or sadism, that is a fool's path. Your enemies will multiply in silence, and when you fall, they will cheer. The leader's mirror, what is reflected back? As Nietzsche warned, he who fights with monsters should look to it that he himself does not become a monster. This is the heart of dark leadership, not just how to rule, but how to survive your own reflection. Because the most dangerous war is not external. It is the war within, between your power and your principles, your instincts and your ethics. And you must ask, what do I become when I command? What part of me must die to lead? Can I still recognize myself in the shadow I cast? This is the tragedy of many modern tyrants. They were not born corrupt. They became their roles. They lost themselves in the architecture of authority. The robes became skin. The mask fused to the face. And so we return to the core question. How do you become feared, without losing your soul? Psychological warfare and the art of influence. Power is not always taken. Often, it is given, willingly, silently, unconsciously. This is the paradox of control. The most effective manipulation is invisible. Machiavelli knew this. In The Prince, he did not only offer tactics for war or statecraft, he offered the architecture of the human mind. He understood. If you control perception, you control people. And if you understand fear, hope, and desire, you can shape behavior more efficiently than through force. This is the art of psychological warfare. Perception is more powerful than truth. People do not follow reality. They follow the illusion of certainty, of strength, of destiny. This is why Machiavelli urged leaders to appear virtuous, even if they are not. To play the role of the benevolent king while wielding the sword of the ruthless general. Everyone sees what you appear to be, few experience what you really are. In modern terms, branding is more powerful than substance. Confidence is more powerful than proof. Image controls narrative, and narrative controls behavior. A leader who understands psychology becomes immune to chaos. You don't need to silence everyone. You only need to control what they believe. The strategic use of fear. Fear is a tool. Like fire. Used carefully, it provides light and warmth. Used recklessly, it burns everything to ash. The goal is not to terrorize, but to create boundaries of consequence. Machiavelli recommends swift, visible punishments that discourage rebellion, but not cruelty for its own sake. Punishment must be predictable, justifiable, and final. Psychologically, this creates a feedback loop in the minds of your followers. Disobedience equals pain. Order equals protection. And once that loop is established, your presence alone is enough. People begin to regulate themselves. Fear becomes internalized, and you rule without even speaking. This is psychological mastery. The illusion of choice. One of the darkest, most powerful tools of manipulation is to give people false choices. This creates the illusion of freedom while guiding them toward the outcome you desire. Offer two options. One they fear. One you've engineered. They will choose the latter, thinking it was their own decision. This tactic is used in marketing, politics, relationships, even religion. It exploits the brain's craving for autonomy and control. When people believe they are choosing, they resist less. And they bond with their captor. Machiavellian psychology turns obedience into an act of free will. Control the story, control the soul. In every society, the most powerful person is not always the one with the weapons, it's the one with the microphone. Because story is the nervous system of belief. And belief is the foundation of identity. A true dark leader writes myths around themselves. He is the savior. She cannot be replaced. Without him, we would fall. The leader becomes an archetype, bigger than human, untouchable, sacred. This was how pharaohs ruled. How emperors deified themselves. How modern leaders become cults of personality. And once you become a myth, reality bends to you. Because people do not defend facts. They defend what gives their life meaning. The moral cost of power, how not to become what you fight. To walk the path of dark leadership is to walk a razor's edge. One step too far, and you lose the very thing that made you powerful. Your humanity. Machiavelli warned us to be feared, but not hated. To be ruthless, but not cruel. To manipulate, but never to lose ourselves in the illusion we create. But how does one hold the sword without becoming the executioner? How does one command fear without being consumed by it? This is where the true art begins, not in domination, but in restraint. The shadow of the leader. Every leader carries a shadow. The unspoken drives. The repressed rage. The thirst for recognition, revenge, or immortality. Machiavelli saw that those who do not confront their shadow are eventually ruled by it. Power reveals character, but it also distorts it. It tempts you to abandon the slow path of discipline for the quick hit of domination. The more control you gain, the more detached you become. From pain. from feedback, from the people you once served. You no longer see others as souls, but as statistics. Not as allies, but as tools. Not as humans, but as pawns. This is the beginning of tyranny, not in structure, but in soul. And it happens slowly. Justified in the name of order, efficiency, security. Until one day, you look in the mirror and see not a leader, but a mask of your own making. Empty. Hardened. Alone. The mirror of solitude. The antidote to this decay is solitude. In solitude, the ego has no audience. The masks fall. The lies echo too loudly to ignore. This is where a true leader must return, not to weakness, but to clarity. Machiavelli might not have said it outright, but his warnings echo louder than his strategies. Power must serve something greater than itself. Otherwise, it becomes its own god, and demands blood. Solitude forces reflection. Reflection restores balance. Balance prevents corruption. Even the most feared leader must kneel, not to men, but to truth. Discipline over impulse. To remain powerful without becoming a tyrant, you must master the art of delayed reaction. Most abuse of power comes not from strategy, but from impulse. A quick decision made in anger. A harsh word to prove dominance. A betrayal, excused as necessity. But true strength is not what you can do. It's what you choose not to do, even when you can. Every moment of restraint builds inner gravity. People begin to sense it, your discipline. They trust it more than your smile or your words. Fear becomes awe. And awe is the beginning of reverence. Leading without losing your soul. To lead with fear without losing your soul, you must anchor yourself in something incorruptible. Not morality, because morality bends to circumstance. Not popularity, because crowds are fickle. But vision. A North Star. A cause that transcends you. When fear becomes the tool, not the goal. When power serves purpose, not ego. When manipulation awakens minds, not enslaves them. Then, you have become more than Machiavellian. You have become sovereign. A dark leader who knows the terrain of the soul. Who can walk among shadows without becoming one. Who inspires not just obedience, but transformation. If Machiavelli were alive today, he wouldn't be wearing a crown. He'd be behind a screen. Pulling the strings of empires made of data. Influencing billions not with armies, but with algorithms. The modern battlefield is not made of blood and soil, but of attention and perception. And the new prince is the one who knows how to manipulate both. Let us now step into the realm where Machiavelli's teachings evolve. Not just for monarchs or politicians, but for entrepreneurs, CEOs, influencers, and strategists. Welcome to the age of psychological warfare dressed in suits and branding. Attention, the new throne of power. Machiavelli understood that perception was half of power. But in our world, perception is power. He who controls the narrative, controls reality. He who captures attention, captures minds. The algorithms reward extremes. Controversy becomes currency. Fear becomes fuel. To lead now is to understand the neural economy. How dopamine, outrage, and tribalism shape behavior faster than logic ever could. The new dark leader knows how to create polarizing personas that draw obsession. Use silence as a louder weapon than noise. Engineer admiration through mystery and threat. Plant narratives that shape public opinion without needing truth. This isn't just psychology, it's psyops. And it is deeply Machiavellian. Reputation as a weapon. In the digital age, image is identity. Your reputation precedes you, and defines you. One scandal can undo years of work. One headline can become a lifetime sentence. Thus, the modern prince must be a master illusionist. Authentic enough to gain trust. Distant enough to avoid scrutiny. Adaptable enough to survive any scandal. Machiavelli would advise. Appear virtuous. Be strategic. Never get caught. Because now, your downfall doesn't come from your enemy, it comes from your archives. Old tweets. Leaked footage. Past mistakes. And so, the new game isn't just playing the role of the leader. It's curating the myth of one. Psychological seduction over physical force. Machiavelli once wrote that a ruler should be both fox and lion, cunning and strong. Today, the fox reigns supreme. Modern dark leadership seduces rather than compels. It doesn't yell. It whispers. It tells you what you want to hear while doing what it must. Makes you feel chosen, even when you're being used. Offers identity, certainty, and tribe in exchange for loyalty. This is the art of psychological manipulation. You're not forcing people to obey. You're making them believe it was their idea all along. And in doing so, you don't just win their actions. You win their hearts. Morality is theater. In the modern world, leaders don't need to be moral. They need to be perceived as morally superior. Virtue signaling. Carefully curated causes. Outrage in all the right directions. But behind the scenes? Deals are made. Loyalty is tested. Enemies are destroyed. Machiavelli would smile here, not because it's new, but because it's always been this way. What's different now is the speed at which morality is weaponized. One viral post. One fake outrage. And your empire crumbles, unless you know how to play the game. True dark leadership today means being 3 moves ahead of the mob. Feeding it what it craves. While secretly steering it where you need. The corporate prince. CEOs are the new monarchs. Tech billionaires are the new gods. And brand is the new kingdom. Machiavelli would not study kings now, he'd study corporate takeovers, social engineering, and political campaigns. He'd say, your company is your court. Your boardroom is your war room. Your shareholders are your nobles. And the public? Your restless peasants, hungry for novelty, rage, and meaning. To rule in this world, the modern prince must combine stoicism to withstand the chaos, strategy to navigate cancel culture, seduction to attract loyalty, and ruthlessness to eliminate threats. We are no longer ruled by swords, but by screens. Not by violence, but by emotional engineering. And the true danger? You don't even know who's leading you anymore. They don't need thrones. They have metrics. They don't need charisma. They have algorithms. They don't need loyalty. They have dependency. To be feared, without becoming a monster. That is the paradox at the heart of Machiavelli's teachings. To wield power, without being consumed by it. To manipulate, without becoming manipulative. To lead through fear, without becoming a tyrant. This is the true art of dark leadership. Not to avoid the shadows, but to walk through them without forgetting your own reflection. Know thyself, or be ruled by shadows. The first rule of dark leadership is inner sovereignty. Before you lead others, you must conquer your own chaos. Otherwise, your need for validation, approval, or vengeance will hijack your leadership. Machiavelli warned against rulers who were ruled by their emotions. Because the truly dangerous leader is not the one who is feared, but the one who is afraid. Afraid of losing control. Afraid of being exposed. Afraid of not being loved. Fearful leaders become tyrants. But sovereign leaders? They become forces of nature. To be feared rightly, you must be feared for your clarity, not your cruelty. For your principles, not your punishments. This begins with self-knowledge. The balance between iron and silk. Great leaders know how to balance the paradox. Be assertive, but not aggressive. Be distant, but not disconnected. Be commanding, but not cold. The mistake many make in pursuing power is to go full iron. They forget the necessity of silk. To be only feared is to invite rebellion. But to be both feared and respected is to create reverent control. You don't want obedience born of terror. You want loyalty born of awe. That requires strength, paired with wisdom. Boundaries, paired with emotional intelligence. Silence, paired with presence. People fear what they don't understand. So your mystique must be cultivated like a fortress. Fear as a tool, not a throne. Machiavelli never said fear was the goal. He said it was the better tool when love is unreliable. But tools are meant to be used, not to become the foundation of your power. If your entire leadership rests on fear, then your power is brittle. You must always escalate. Always intimidate. Always defend. It's exhausting. It's dangerous. And eventually, it breaks. The real art is using fear strategically. To draw boundaries. To dissuade enemies. To signal consequence. But not to dominate every interaction. Because the most powerful leaders don't need to constantly remind you of their power. You feel it in their presence. You see it in their discipline. You trust it in their silence. They are not feared because they threaten. They are feared because they could, but rarely do. That's true power. The discipline of controlled darkness. Everyone has a shadow. The Machiavellian leader doesn't repress it. He integrates it. He learns to use his aggression wisely. His cunning, ethically. His ambition, productively. This is what Jung called the integration of the shadow. To become whole, not just good. To have teeth, and know when not to bite. To have claws, and choose not to scratch. To have the capacity for violence, and wield it only as a last resort. This isn't weakness. It's restraint. It's power refined through consciousness. And it's what separates a sovereign from a tyrant. Transcending the hunger for control. The final trap of dark leadership is attachment. The more power you gain, the more you want to hold on to it. The more people fear you, the more you fear being replaced. And so you cling. You scheme. You tighten your grip. But true leadership isn't about control. It's about impact. The greatest leaders don't need to control every variable. They empower others to act, think, and lead in their absence. The most feared leader isn't the one who controls every room. It's the one whose vision haunts every decision, even when they are not there. Because power that depends on your constant presence is weak. But power that leaves a legacy, that's invincible. To be feared without losing yourself means knowing yourself so well that no external chaos can unseat your clarity. Using fear not as a blanket tactic, but as a scalpel. Balancing ruthlessness with principle. Leading not through domination, but through presence. Machiavelli gave us the blueprint. But it is up to you to live it without becoming what you hate. Machiavelli gave us the blueprint. But it is your consciousness that determines whether that blueprint becomes a castle or a cage. Let's end with the most overlooked dimension of Machiavelli's philosophy. It wasn't just about strategy, or politics, or fear. It was about what it costs you to play the game of power. He warned. If you want to be safe, be feared. But if you want to be whole, you must pay a different price. Because the true danger of manipulation is not that it corrupts others. It's that it slowly erodes your sense of self. Every time you deceive, you must remember the lie. Every time you control, you must maintain the illusion. Every time you weaponize fear, you risk becoming addicted to it. And in the end, you no longer remember who you were before you became powerful. Machiavelli's wisdom wasn't a call to cruelty. It was a mirror for human nature. He simply said, "This is the world. Now, who do you choose to become within it?" The highest form of dark leadership is disciplined compassion. Not softness. Not naivety. But the ability to hold paradox. To lead with strength, but rooted in care. To be feared, but never feared for the wrong reasons. To dominate your domain, without becoming a slave to power itself. That is the rarest form of sovereignty. Not the ruler with the biggest army. Not the manipulator with the darkest tricks. But the one who can enter the shadow and emerge with their soul intact. This is how to be feared without losing yourself. This is the art of dark leadership. And now the choice is yours.